In the middle of another busy day, you finish one responsibility only to face the next. Work piles up, expectations from family and friends pull in different directions, and by evening you sit down feeling like something important is missing even though you can't quite name it. That steady sense of being pulled along by life rather than choosing your own path is something millions of people know well. It shows up in quiet moments when you wonder if this is really it, or when you push aside your own needs to keep everyone else happy. Stoicism cuts straight through this kind of everyday drift by focusing on what you can control and what truly matters before time runs out. If this speaks to you, take a second right now to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. It helps us bring more of this practical wisdom straight to you. Number 1. Living a life true to yourself, not the one others expect. People who have reached the final stage of life often look back with clear eyes and wish they had told their younger selves one simple but powerful truth. Stop organizing your entire existence around what other people expect or approve of. Many spent decades following paths laid out by parents, partners, colleagues, or society at large, believing that fitting in would bring security and respect. Instead, they discovered too late that those choices left their own inner compass ignored and their deepest values unexpressed. This is not a call for dramatic rebellion or sudden life changes. It is about making steady, honest decisions day after day that line up with who you actually are rather than the version you think the world wants to see. When you repeatedly adjust your actions, career moves, relationships, and even daily habits just to gain approval or avoid disapproval, you gradually surrender control of your own time and energy to forces you can never fully manage. The Stoics were very clear about this danger. They taught that externals such as reputation, status, and the opinions of others belong to the category of things not up to us. Your character and your rational choices are the only domains fully within your power. Living according to someone else's map slowly weakens that character from within and creates a life that feels slightly hollow, even when it looks successful on the outside. Your younger self needed to hear this early, so the slow erosion could be stopped before years accumulated. From the perspective of someone lying in a bed, knowing their days are numbered, the years spent performing a version of themselves that never quite felt authentic become painfully obvious. The regret does not usually arrive as loud anger or dramatic outburst. It settles in as a steady, quiet ache. The knowledge that many dreams and personal directions were left unexplored because the fear of disappointing others carried more weight than the desire to live honestly. Stoic practice, especially the daily evening review recommended by Seneca and Marcus Aurelius, would have trained the younger self to notice these small daily compromises and correct course while there was still plenty of time left. A practical way to apply this Stoic lesson starts small and builds with consistency. Set aside 10 quiet minutes each evening to write down what you truly value most at this stage of life, without filtering it through other people's expectations. Then pick one single action the following day that moves you even slightly closer to living by those values, even if it feels uncomfortable or risks mild disapproval. Over months and years, these small, honest choices compound into a life that feels genuinely your own. Those who have faced death often say that learning this habit of private courage much earlier would have prevented the heaviest part of their regret. Time only moves forward. Every single hour you spend shaping yourself to fit an external script is an hour taken permanently from the limited store you were given. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself constantly that we do not have endless years ahead and that death stands ready at any moment. Treating each day with that awareness sharpens the question: am I living according to my own reason and nature today, or am I still borrowing someone else's map? Your younger self would have been deeply grateful to receive this reminder before the weight of accumulated years made changing direction feel almost impossible. When you finally commit to living true to yourself, a different kind of calm settles in. It has nothing to do with external praise, financial success, or social standing. It is the steady knowledge that you have used your finite time in a way that honors your own rational nature. People at the very end of life speak of this inner alignment with a kind of peaceful certainty. It is one of the few things that still brings real comfort when health, possessions, and future plans have all fallen away. Start practicing this today, and your future self will never need to carry the particular burden of having lived someone else's version of your life. Number 3, express your true feelings before it is too late. Those approaching the end of life often wish they had told their younger selves to speak their honest thoughts and emotions with clarity and courage instead of swallowing them repeatedly to maintain surface-level peace or avoid awkward moments. They carried years of unsaid love, unsaid hurt, unsaid boundaries, and unsaid truths, convinced that silence was the safer or kinder path. Over time, that silence built invisible walls between them and the people closest to them. Stoicism places high value on the virtue of courage, and that courage must include the willingness to communicate truthfully without cruelty, exaggeration, or unnecessary drama. Suppressing feelings does not protect relationships. It slowly poisons them with unspoken resentment. Keeping important feelings locked inside creates a slow accumulation of internal pressure. The Stoics taught that a rational human being lives in accordance with nature, which includes relating justly and openly with others. Clear, calm expression of what you feel and what you need is part of that rational living. Your younger self needed to understand that voicing love, setting a firm boundary, or admitting disappointment does not make you difficult or weak. Done properly, it actually keeps connections real and prevents bitterness from growing unchecked in the background. From the perspective of someone whose time has grown very short, the weight of all those unspoken words feels heavier than any single argument ever did. The regret is not usually explosive. It sits quietly in the realization that many opportunities for deeper honesty and closeness were allowed to pass because the temporary discomfort of speaking up seemed larger than the long-term cost of staying silent. Practicing premeditatio malorum, imagining potential difficult conversations in advance, would have prepared the younger self to face those moments with steadiness rather than avoidance or withdrawal. A concrete Stoa practice is to commit to expressing one honest but respectful sentence each week that you have been holding back. Deliver it directly and calmly to the person involved. At first it may feel awkward, but repetition builds skill and reduces the emotional charge. The relief that follows each honest exchange becomes its own quiet reward. People who have reached the end of life often reflect that developing this habit decades earlier would have transformed many of their most important relationships and removed a significant source of later sorrow. Time does not pause for the perfect moment to speak. Every day that passes with important feelings left unexpressed is a day that cannot be reclaimed. The Stoics knew that living according to reason means living openly and truthfully where it matters, not hiding behind layers of polite silence or fear of rocking the boat. Your younger self would have carried that principle as a daily guide, using it to decide when silence truly served justice and when honesty was required. When you learn to express your true feelings with respect and timing, both you and the other person are freed from years of guesswork, distance, and quiet misunderstanding. Those who have faced death speak of this freedom with a steady kind of peace. Nothing significant left unsaid means far less to regret when the end arrives. Give your younger self the straightforward instruction to speak while voices can still be heard, and notice how much lighter and more authentic daily life becomes. Number 4, stay in touch with your friends and loved ones. People nearing the end of life frequently wished they had told their younger selves to make consistent, deliberate effort to keep real human connections alive rather than allowing busy schedules, distance, and daily pressures to slowly erode them. Calls that could have been made were postponed, visits were put off until things calmed down, and friendships that once felt central gradually faded into occasional memories while work, routines, and new obligations took over the calendar. Stoicism regards justice and kindness toward others as central virtues, and genuine friendship is one of the clearest arenas in which to practice both consistently over a lifetime. Allowing important relationships to drift creates a slow-growing loneliness that becomes more noticeable only when health or circumstances limit your ability to rebuild them. The Stoics understood that human beings are naturally social creatures, and that strong, reciprocal relationships provide essential support for a steady and resilient mind. Your younger self needed to hear that maintaining contact with friends and loved ones is not merely a pleasant extra activity. It is a fundamental part of living well and cannot be replaced later by achievements, money, or busyness. When life draws to a close, the comfort and joy that came from the few relationships kept alive through small, repeated efforts stand out sharply against everything else that has fallen away. The regret is soft but unmistakable. Many hours that could have been spent sharing laughter, offering support, or simply being present were spent in isolation or superficial interaction instead. Regular Stoic reflection on impermanence, remembering that every person you care about is mortal and will not be here forever, would have served as a powerful daily prompt to prioritize those connections while they were still possible. A simple but effective rule is to reach out intentionally to at least one friend or family member each week for a real conversation, not just a quick text or social media like. Treat that outreach with the same reliability you give to work commitments. Over the years, these consistent threads weave a net of support and shared history that holds firm when other parts of life become uncertain or painful. Those who have sat with death often say that building this habit much earlier would have left their final days surrounded by more warmth and fewer empty spaces. Every relationship allowed to fade quietly represents a loss whose full weight is usually felt only when it is too late to restore it easily. The Stoics advised approaching each interaction with the awareness that it could be the last, which naturally brings greater presence, warmth, and appreciation to the time you spend together. Your younger self would have found that mindset enormously helpful in deciding how to allocate limited hours and energy. When you keep those key connections strong through ordinary, repeated effort, the end of life holds noticeably fewer regrets about isolation or miscloseness. People who have faced it speak plainly on this point. The individuals who remained part of their lives brought more lasting peace and meaning than any career accomplishment or material gain. Give your younger self the clear, practical instruction to stay in touch while the opportunity still exists, and the coming decades will feel richer and more human as a result. Number 5. Let yourself be happier by choosing it each day. Those at the end of their lives often wish they had told their younger selves to stop waiting passively for happiness to appear once certain external conditions were finally met, and instead to choose it deliberately within the ordinary moments that already existed. They postponed real enjoyment and contentment for some future achievement, perfect relationship, financial security, or ideal set of circumstances that kept moving further into the distance. Stoicism teaches that genuine contentment is not a prize waiting at the end of a long chase. It is an internal state cultivated through daily attitude, acceptance of what is, and focused attention on what can be controlled right now. Waiting for life to improve before allowing yourself to feel satisfied keeps a person in a permanent state of postponement and mild dissatisfaction. The Stoics focused on accepting the present reality as it is and finding what is good within it, because they knew most external events ultimately lie beyond our complete control. Your younger self needed to learn that you possess the power to notice and appreciate what is already sufficient in the current day, instead of constantly scanning the horizon for what still seems missing. From the vantage point of final days, the long periods spent chasing a future version of happiness look like significant time spent pursuing an illusion. The regret surfaces calmly but clearly. Countless ordinary days could have carried more lightness, gratitude, and simple pleasure if the deliberate choice to be content had been made earlier rather than deferred. Daily Stoic practices, such as morning reflection on what the day might bring, and evening review of what went well, would have trained the younger self to spot and hold on to moments of quiet satisfaction instead of letting them pass unnoticed. Begin each morning by quietly naming 3 small, concrete things present in your current situation that you can appreciate exactly as they are, without requiring them to be better or different. Then deliberately act on at least one small source of genuine enjoyment or meaning during the day. Repeat this until it becomes an automatic pattern rather than an occasional effort. Those who have reached the end often reflect that adopting this kind of daily choice decades sooner would have transformed many otherwise ordinary years into a life that felt deeply worthwhile. Happiness in the Stoic sense is not a distant destination reached after all problems are solved. It is a steady way of moving through whatever the present day actually contains, good, bad, or indifferent. The ancient Stoics lived this principle even amid exile, illness, and political danger. Your younger self would have been profoundly freed by understanding that the capacity for contentment was already inside them and did not depend on rearranging the outside world first. When you make the active choice to allow yourself happiness each day, the approach of the end carries a different tone, one of having used the available time well instead of having spent it mainly in waiting mode. Those who have faced death speak of this daily choice with steady, unforced peace. They wish they had passed the instruction on to their younger selves long before the final chapter began. Start choosing contentment now, in a life you already have, rather than deferring it indefinitely. Begin that practice today and carry the wisdom forward without further delay. Number 6. Accept what you cannot change and focus on what you can. Many who face their final days wish they had told their younger selves to stop fighting against realities they could never alter and instead direct all their energy toward what was truly within their power. They spent years worrying about other people's behavior, past mistakes that could not be undone, and outcomes that depended on luck, timing, or circumstances far beyond their influence. This constant resistance created unnecessary inner turmoil and wasted precious time. Stoicism cuts through this struggle with the clear distinction between what is up to us and what is not. Your judgments, intentions, and actions belong to you. Everything else, including how others act, what the future holds, or events that have already happened, does not. Resisting the unchangeable turns ordinary difficulties into prolonged suffering. The Stoics, especially Epictetus, taught that we are disturbed not by things themselves but by our opinions about them. When you accept what cannot be changed, you free mental space for calm, rational action in the areas you can influence. Your younger self needed to hear this early because the habit of fighting reality builds quietly over decades and becomes harder to break as life moves forward. From the end of life, the energy spent worrying about uncontrollable events looks like time stolen from moments that could have been lived with greater peace. The regret is measured and clear. So many days were clouded by frustration over things that were never going to bend to personal will. Regular practice of the dichotomy of control would have trained the younger self to recognize these moments quickly and redirect attention to productive responses instead of futile resistance. A practical daily exercise is to pause when frustration arises and silently classify the situation. Is this up to me or not? If it is not, consciously release the emotional grip and ask what small action remains possible right now. Over time, this creates a lighter mind that moves through challenges with steadiness rather than exhaustion. Those who have reached the end say mastering this distinction decades earlier would have saved them from years of self-inflicted mental strain. Life constantly presents things we cannot control, and every moment spent battling them is a moment taken from living well. Marcus Aurelius wrote that the universe is change, and our portion is to accept it with grace. Your younger self would have benefited from writing this principle down and reviewing it often to build the muscle of acceptance before resistance became a default pattern. When you truly accept what lies outside your control, a profound inner freedom emerges. You stop wasting life on impossible battles and start investing it in becoming the kind of person who responds wisely to whatever arises. People at the end of life speak of this acceptance with quiet relief. It allowed them to meet their final days without the heavy burden of what if or if only. Teach your younger self this lesson now, and the years ahead will carry far less unnecessary weight. Number 7, take care of your body and mind as if they matter. People nearing death often wish they had told their younger selves that neglecting physical and mental health in the pursuit of short-term goals was a mistake that could not be fully corrected later. They pushed their bodies through poor sleep, constant stress, unhealthy habits, and lack of movement, assuming there would always be time to fix things later. The mind was similarly overloaded with endless information and negative thoughts without deliberate care. Stoicism views the body as the vessel for the rational soul and treats health as something to be respected, not abused. Taking care of both body and mind is part of living according to nature and preserving the ability to practice virtue for as long as possible. Ignoring the body's signals and the mind's need for rest creates a slow decline that becomes obvious only when reversal grows difficult. The Stoics practiced moderation and self-discipline not for appearance, but to maintain clarity and strength for what truly matters. Your younger self needed to understand that consistent, moderate care for health is not selfish or secondary. It is the foundation that allows you to show up fully for life and for others. Looking back from the final stage, the consequences of years of neglect feel heavier than they did in the moment. The regret is practical and sincere. Many experiences and relationships were limited because energy and clarity had been quietly drained away. Stoic training in endurance and simplicity would have encouraged the younger self to build healthy routines early rather than treating the body as something that could be pushed indefinitely. Start with small, sustainable habits. Consistent sleep, daily movement that feels good rather than extreme, simple, nourishing food, and time each day to quiet the mind through reflection or stillness. Treat these practices with the same importance you give to work or family obligations. Those facing the end often say that building these habits in their 30s or 40s would have given them more years of strength and presence. Your time and energy are finite resources. Every day you neglect your body or overload your mind is a day that reduces the quality of all the days that follow. Seneca advised living each day as if it were complete in itself, which includes caring for the instrument through which you experience life. Your younger self would have been wiser for receiving this reminder before small neglects turned into lasting limitations. When you care for your body and mind with steady attention, you preserve the capacity for calm, clear thinking and meaningful action even as years accumulate. People at the end describe this care with straightforward gratitude. It allowed them to face their final chapter with dignity and fewer physical regrets. Give your younger self the instruction to treat health as a daily practice, and the entire journey will be steadier and more fully lived. Number 8. Remember that death is certain and live accordingly. Those who have stood at the edge of life most clearly wish they had told their younger selves to keep the reality of death present in their minds, not as something frightening to avoid, but as a steady guide for how to use each day. They lived for many years as though time were unlimited, postponing important changes, relationships, and personal growth until later. This illusion of endless time quietly stole depth and urgency from their days. Stoicism places memento mori, the remembrance of death, at the center of a wise life. It is not morbid. It is the clearest way to cut through trivial distractions and focus on what has real value. Pretending death is far away allows small, meaningless pursuits to fill the calendar while truly important matters wait. The Stoics, from Seneca to Marcus Aurelius, return to the thought of mortality daily to sharpen their priorities and reduce attachment to unimportant things. Your younger self needed to hear this truth early so that the awareness of limited time could shape decisions while change was still easy and energy was still high. From a final perspective, the years spent living without this awareness feel like time lived half awake. The regret is calm but deep. So many opportunities for growth, connection, and virtue were delayed because the mind assumed tomorrow would always be there. Regular morning or evening contemplation of mortality would have trained the younger self to ask each day, if this were my last, how would I choose to act? A practical way to keep death close is to end each day with a short reflection. I have lived this day. It cannot be repeated. Use that thought to guide tomorrow's choices toward virtue, relationships, and what truly matters. Those who have faced death say that cultivating this awareness decades earlier would have infused their lives with greater purpose and fewer empty pursuits. Death is the one certainty we all share, and every day ignored is a day permanently lost. The Stoics use this fact not to create fear, but to create freedom. Freedom from trivial worries and freedom to live fully in the present. Your younger self would have carried this reminder as a quiet compass, helping to discard what is unimportant and embrace what is essential. When you live with the steady knowledge that your time is limited, each day gains a different weight and clarity. People at the end of life often speak of this practice with peaceful acceptance. They wish they had told their younger selves to remember death sooner, so they could have lived with greater intention from the beginning. Start today. Keep death as a wise companion, and let it guide you toward a life that needs no major regrets when the end finally comes.